Richard Donovan was the kind of man people whispered about. Billionaire, business mogul, owner of skyscrapers that touched the clouds. His empire stretched across the globe. But his heart? That was locked away behind walls of steel and pride. At charity galas, he wore the sharpest tuxedos. At meetings, his word was law. Yet in the quiet halls of his mansion, Richard lived with a truth he never shared publicly. His only son, Michael, was born with cerebral palsy. Michael was 13, bright, funny, full of dreams, but trapped in a body that didn't always obey him. He moved in a wheelchair most of the time, and while his mind was sharp, his father's world of perfection left little room for him to shine. Richard loved his boy, but he also feared him becoming the center of whispers, pitiful glances, or cruel laughter. So he kept Michael sheltered, tucked away from the public eye. One evening, after a tense day of negotiations, Michael begged his father to take him out. Not to one of the grand restaurants where chandeliers sparkled, but to a simple roadside diner he had seen from the car window before. Richard sighed. "Michael, those places aren't for us. Let's go somewhere proper." But Michael insisted. For once, Richard gave in. The diner smelled of fresh coffee, sizzling burgers, and homemade pie. It was filled with laughter, music, and families in simple clothes, worlds apart from the crystal halls Richard was used to. A waitress named Aaliyah noticed them immediately. She was young, around her mid-20s, with kind eyes and an easy smile. Unlike the waiters Richard usually encountered, she didn't freeze or lower her tone around the billionaire. She greeted them like ordinary guests. "Welcome. Table for two?" she asked cheerfully, bending down slightly to meet Michael's gaze instead of towering over him. Michael smiled wide, unused to strangers treating him like any other kid. Richard noticed the sparkle in his son's eyes, but ignored it. He was busy scanning the laminated menu with slight disgust. As they ate, music floated from the jukebox. Aaliyah passed by, humming. Then she stopped near Michael. "You know," she said warmly, "this song has the perfect rhythm for a dance. Do you dance?" Michael's cheeks turned red. I can't." Richard quickly cut in. "He's not able to—" But before he could finish, Aaliyah crouched beside Michael and whispered, "Everyone can dance. The steps don't matter. It's about the heart. Want to try?" For the first time in his life, Michael nodded with excitement. Aaliyah helped him up carefully, supporting his weight. The diner grew quiet, all eyes on the boy who took shaky, uneven steps to the music. Step, pause, sway. Aaliyah let Michael lead. She didn't correct him, didn't guide too much. She followed his rhythm, clumsy as it was. The diner clapped softly, then louder, until the whole room was cheering. Richard sat frozen. He had spent years hiding his son from stares. And here strangers were applauding him, not with pity, but with joy. Michael collapsed back into his chair, laughing breathlessly. "Dad, did you see? I danced." For the first time in years, Richard's throat tightened. He had no words. After dinner, Richard approached Aaliyah, curious. Why did you do that?" She shrugged. "Because I know how it feels to be invisible." Richard frowned. Aaliyah continued, her voice softer now. "My younger brother was born with spina bifida. People looked right past him, or worse, looked at him with pity. But whenever he danced, he wasn't disabled, he was free. He passed away 2 years ago, but I promised myself I'd never let another child feel unseen." Richard stood stunned. For once, the billionaire had no business card, no checkbook, no clever answer. Only silence. That night back at the mansion, Richard couldn't sleep. The image of Michael's glowing face haunted him. He realized something terrifying. He had given his son every luxury, except the courage to live. The next morning, he made a decision. He enrolled Michael in a dance therapy program. At first, Michael struggled. He fell, got frustrated, wanted to quit. But Richard, awkwardly at first, stood by him. For the first time in his life, Richard canceled meetings, ignored phone calls, and sat in a studio smelling of sweat and determination, clapping for his son. Weeks passed. Michael improved little by little. His body grew stronger, his confidence brighter. One day, the program held a small recital. Michael insisted he wanted to perform. Richard's instinct screamed to say no. He feared the whispers, the judgment, the spotlight. But then he remembered Aaliyah's words, "Every child deserves a chance to shine." So he said yes. The auditorium filled with families. When Michael rolled onto the stage, murmurs filled the room. But then the music started. Slowly, he rose from his chair. His steps were shaky, but his spirit was fierce. He danced, small, imperfect moves, but with more soul than anyone in the room. Halfway through, he looked at his father in the front row and stretched out his hand. The audience gasped as Richard stood and walked onto the stage. For the first time, the billionaire didn't care about the stares. He took his son's hand. Together, they swayed, clumsy and uncoordinated, but perfect. By the end, the entire hall was on its feet, applauding through tears. Richard later founded a nationwide foundation for children with disabilities, offering programs in art, dance, and sports. He poured millions into it, but more importantly, he poured himself into Michael's world. People would ask Richard what caused his transformation. He never mentioned business deals or success. Instead, he always said with a soft smile, "It started in a diner, with a waitress who believed in my son more than I did." Moral: love is not in shielding someone from the world. It is in giving them the courage to step into it.